All right, so we're into doing Maplibre now. So we're just going to do the same thing. This might feel a little slow. If you're just interested in learning one of these systems, just skip over these videos and move right on. But yeah, we're going to go over Maplibre, a bit of a different system, but doing the same stuff, adding points. Okay, so here's the Maplibre site. I've loaded up a basic map. We went over this in the tile set stuff. Here's the code. And yeah, we can see here we load up the map. Then we have this onload function. Actually, we don't have to have this basic marker inside this onload function. So let's just look at this first. And we have this marker. It's very similar to the leaflet way. They actually made this specifically to try to make it kind of similar to leaflet. So yeah, there's a marker example. Very straightforward. We do the new marker. We set the long lat and we add it to the map. So we can do the same thing where we go to geojson.io. We make a point. We come over and we drop it in with the coordinates there. Very important there that we actually have longitude, latitude. It even says set long lat, right, to kind of make the point obvious. And again, this marker is just a default marker in Maplibre. It's just an image, just like Leaflet has its own default marker. This is the one in Maplibre. Now, that being said, I think you can change the color of this quite easily. Yeah, it has a color option. So let's say we wanted to change the option. I think we can do it right here. We could say color and let's make it red. And let's just see if that works. Let's see if we reload it. There it is. It's red. So again, here, this is the Maplibre documentation. It's different than the leaflet one. And inside this, we have our options here. And there's all kinds of options. We're going to go over a couple of these, but most of these you should be able to you know, kind of muddle through if you kind of know what you're trying to do. There's an offset, there's the scale of it, and there's color, and really the rest of them you don't need too much. Okay, so that's the marker, pretty straightforward. That's not a big deal. That's not different than leaflet really. But when we get into adding a circle, in leaflet, adding a circle was basically the same as adding a marker. We just did an L dot circle instead of L dot marker, and it made a circle. But in Maplibre, it's a totally different system. We have to add a source and a layer. And this is where working with the GeoJSON again proves useful, because the source tends to be a GeoJSON. This is actually a fairly complicated function, a fairly complicated thing that you can do in Maplibre or Mapbox. And you can add different kinds of sources. We're not going to get too deep into that in this course. We're just trying to tackle the basics. But really, most of the time when I'm using this in an actual application, I'm adding a GeoJSON. I'm a custom GeoJSON or one that I have loading from a file or something like that. In this case, I literally just went to geojson.io, copied the entire GeoJSON. So if I just went here, same thing that we did in Leaflet when we were adding a GeoJSON. We make a point, boom, and then up here on the right-hand side, we have the whole GeoJSON. We copy that in, and that goes into this data property. So we make this thing add source, and then we give it an ID. This is basically an ID, this first little string I put here. Then there's an object which tells it what the data is. Okay, you don't need to know this too well. There's just a couple pieces that you need to know. And then in the next section, we add a layer. So that source isn't visible. Nothing is visible with the source. It's just like a data layer that's on the map. It's just a data source, I should say, not a data layer. This second part is the actual visible layer. This is basically making use of the data. So in theory, a source could have points, lines, and polygons, and the different layers you would add would each style those different points, layers, or polygon differently. So in this case, we just have one point. Our GeoJSON is just one point. So our circle is just going to appear as a single point on the map. Now, the thing that ties these two together is this thing here that says source. So when I tell it our source, and I named the source that I created our source, this knows to use this data that's been added onto the map but isn't visible. And then I add a type of layer called circle, and I give it an ID. The ID is it just has to be there to make it unique. It's not really important. But the type is circle. So what is this about? Okay, well, these layers are actually pretty complicated, and we're going to have to get into it in steps when it comes to Maplibre, because as you see here, I'm here on this circle thing, and it says a circle style layer renders one or more filled circles. And over here on the right, we see there's these different like properties. There's color, opacity, radius. stroke color. These are kind of similar to what we saw in Leaflet, but they're like differently organized. And there's these little paint icons beside them and this little pencil icon. So these are different types of properties. We're going to be getting into that more. I just want to introduce it to you. We're actually going to get into it right away, pretty quick. But we don't have to add them if we just want to have just the default settings appear for a circle. So the default settings is for the circle to be black, and it is like a 5-pixel radius or something like that. So if we save this and we reload, we are going to get this little black circle, and it's in the same place that the point, that the marker was. So we're doing the same thing. We're just adding that GeoJSON and then adding a default circle layer. One important piece here is that you need to do this inside the load function. This is basically meaning after the map loads. So when the map is loading, if you try to add a source, it will give you an error being like, don't add a source until the map has finished loading. This is just a quirk of Maplibre. You just have to get used to this. You don't really have to understand this. Map.on load function, blah, blah, blah. And then inside it, you do all your adding sources and adding layers stuff. Really important. Without that, it won't work. So, okay, we added a circle layer. Now, one of the cool things about Maplibre is we don't have to re-add this data if we also want to show it another way. So if I wanted to also have some text showing, because we can have this appear as text, we can have it appear as an icon, we can have it appear as a circle. There's a few ways we can make this appear. And in the future lessons, we're going to see it appear as a line and as a polygon. But it's a different type of layer. So you can see here I have type symbol instead of type circle. So if we go to this style spec here, I don't love how this is organized. I find it kind of confusing on the right-hand side here. There's, okay, fill, line, symbol. There's the symbol layer. And you can see here they have an example with a lot of icons. But you can also have text. There's all these look at all these options. There's just tons and tons of options. It's pretty overwhelming. But the one we're going to look for is text field for now. And this is basically the value to use for a text label. Okay, so I want to have a label because if I just add a symbol layer, the default isn't, there's no text by default. It's just empty. So in order to show anything, I have to put in some text to actually appear on the map where the point is. So in this case, I make it say label in all uppercase. Now I had to put this inside a layout like property. It's all a little confusing, but there's layout and there's paint, like I said, and this one is a layout property. So the ones that are layout have to be inside this layout thing, and the ones that are paint would be inside this other one. So maybe text color would be paint, right? So if I make this, let's do red again. Okay, so we have layout and we have paint properties, and we have these specific properties which we have to look up, and then we have to learn like exactly how to use them. So let's reload with that there. And we see there's some red text, and it's centered exactly in the middle of the point. Now there's all kinds of other stuff we could do with the options. We could move that point around. We can do other things. But the key here is understanding this data thing with the GeoJSON, and then these layers that reference the data that we added, and then add it visually onto the map in certain ways, whether that's circles, symbols, lines, polygons. So in the next couple of videos, we'll quickly go over what it is to do a line. It's going to be very similar here, and a polygon. And then we kind of done the same thing in Mapbox and or in Maplibre and Leaflet. See you in the next one.